What's up, friends, and welcome back to the show. Man, do I have an inspiring episode for you today. The founder of Kono Nutrition, Alex Conley. He was diagnosed with cancer just before his 4th birthday and was in a battle with that until he was 12 years old. He talks about his first memories of the loss over his body and this fight for his life and how that gave him the perspective that health is the most important thing. A career in the medical field where he went back in to be a part of the system that he thought helped save him, to see that some of the stuff inside of that system is broken, to then removing himself with the dedication and the mission to create the cleanest products in the world to fuel you and give you your health back. There's so much insight from this young man about life and overcoming adversity and what it means to truly be healthy and what's happening in the ecosphere of the online culture wars and so much more. You're going to love this episode. Let's get into it with Alex. Alex, I've heard you say on other podcasts, one of my favorite quotes, which you said is one of yours, if not the favorite quote of your life, which is, a man with his health has 1,000 wishes and a man without his health has only one, which is, of course, for his health back. And you kind of started life being robbed of your health somewhat. It's a crazy inspiring story. Talk to me about what you went through when you were diagnosed at 4 years old with cancer.
Yeah, man. That's why that quote always resonates so hard with me, is because, like you said, I have lived it. And it was 3 weeks before my 4th birthday. And what was going on is I was so weak that I couldn't even get up and walk to the bathroom. And my parents just obviously knew that something was deeply, deeply wrong. And I have an older sister that's 18 months older than I am. And we were both sick. We both had a cold, and she got over it and I didn't. And so my mom kept taking me back to the doctor and kept asking questions. And the doctor just kept turning us away and turning us away. And eventually we went to the emergency room once it got to the point that I couldn't walk. And that was actually my first memory in life, which is wild because that's
Wow.
right around the time when your first memories start to form. And like I said, it was 3 weeks before my 4th birthday. And what I remember is this strange man just carrying me into the hospital because my dad was at work. He wasn't around. My mom took me in and she was just kind of in a frenzy and a panic showing up.
Right.
And this guy that was parked next to us just helped us. And so that was the first thing that I can remember in my life, was being truly afraid and not knowing what was going on. And he's carrying me into the hospital. We go in, do blood work, and the doctor that kept turning my mom away was actually the doctor that made his way back to the hospital to be the one to give the diagnosis to my mom because he
Oh,
felt so
geez.
bad. And so the diagnosis was acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and it's the most common form of childhood cancer. And this was in 1998, which around the time the survival rate was roughly 80%. And now it's luckily all the way up to, I think, up close to 95% survival
Wow.
rate. So we've made a lot of progress on that, but it's still the most common form of childhood cancer. And that just led me down such a unique journey in my health in life, because obviously that was my first memory, right? Was being afraid to die and being really sick. And so I knew that that was the most important thing in the world to me, was being healthy. And, that's I did, the classic Western medicine route. My parents didn't really know what to do. And as a parent, I can only imagine they just wanted to do everything they could to give me the best chance to have a life because I was so young. And so I did almost 4 years of chemotherapy. And little boys, for some reason, get a little bit more sick and a little bit worse leukemia than little girls. And so for girls, the treatment's a little bit different, but for boys, it was pretty aggressive. And especially for me, because we caught it a little bit late, and it was pretty aggressive. And so, yeah, I did almost 4 years of chemo, and then many years of steroids, prednisone, bunch of medications. And then it wasn't until my 12th birthday, actually, that I was officially announced cancer-free.
Wow. Dude, yeah, talk about an interesting childhood. Hey, that's crazy, man. I can't. This is what's really interesting about a scenario like this, because, like you said, in those moments, some of your first memories being formed with this just tragedy, essentially, and the fear and the hopelessness and the loss of power, the loss of your own body, and now coming full circle into your healing journey and everything that you've been through and why you do what you do with Kono Nutrition. But also, I know you've got a kind of professional history kind of in and around the medical complex too. Is it how hard is it for you to kind of square the circle of this tension between like holistic living and healing, whilst also being really bloody thankful that if we didn't have that level of technology and medicine, you probably wouldn't be here, right? Isn't it a very interesting thing to wrestle with?
It is, and I still often do it. For me, a journey for me has also just been like wondering why. And my parents obviously went down that rabbit hole. Like, why did I get leukemia? What was going on?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, we saw blood cancer spike around 500 to 1,000%. So
Wow.
a really unique big increase that we hadn't typically seen in the past. Normally, over a decade, we were maybe seeing 5-10% increases. And in 1991 is when they allowed glyphosate to be able to spray directly onto crops. And then,
Wow.
all of a sudden we see this big increase in blood cancers. And now we know that Monsanto and the glyphosate company has been sued for
Yeah.
billions and billions. I think it's like $16 billion due to specifically blood cancer cases. And so I think that that was a potential big cause of that. And so really, like, if I take the Western medicine thing out of it, it's like, dang, I firmly believe that we probably wouldn't even have so many of these cancers if we could just get fair farming practices. But obviously, on the other hand, I'm super grateful that, like, because, I did have this experience, that Western medicine was there with these type of treatments to give
Mm,
me a chance to live and have this life. So I definitely do wrestle with it. I think that they are, Western medicine kind of has a job though, because we've screwed everything up.
right.
And
Right.
so like the ultimate goal is to not need Western medicine. But if we do in these acute settings or in these, unique situations, I definitely think it still has its time and place. Like I
Yeah.
think that the biggest thing for me is like, anti-pharma or anti-Western medicine for me doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a role in our society. It just means that they need to play a fair role in our society.
Very well said. Yeah, I think on either end of the spectrum or whatever camp, left and right, and all of these kind of tribalistic communications and dialogues we have these days, it's the other side wants to throw all the baby out with the bathwater, and I don't think that is the answer. Like the truth always lies somewhere in like a messy middle,
Mhm.
and you hit some key points there, which is like the Western medical system is invaluable for acute injuries, right? Like if I get a gunshot wound, if I break my arm, if I have a laceration, it's incredible. Even like emergency surgery, the way they can repair people's hearts and all manner of things that just absolutely blow my mind. It's a bloody miracle. But for chronic lifestyle derived diseases, most of which are contributing to the rising cause of not only why we spend trillions of dollars a year on people's health, but probably one of the biggest contributors to an early loss of life. Something like 7 out of every 10 deaths can be attributed to a chronic disease, which is
Mhm.
rooted in lifestyle and diet related issues. The Western medicine is just not equipped to handle that because the whole incentives and the program and how much time you spend with your doctor, etc. It's just you can't get to the root cause of anything. So it's very interesting, and it is something that like is you can two truths can coexist, right? You can be simultaneously very grateful for it in your case, and if I would ever need it, I'd be like, thank God that it's here, but also like you said, I don't want anything to do with it at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, you nailed it completely. And I also, like you touched on earlier, I had a unique perspective because that was my first job out of college, was actually working back in Western medicine.
Right.
So when I went to school, I actually was studying pre-med, and that was what I wanted to do my entire life because I always looked up to doctors, right? Because
Mm,
it was like they saved me. That's always what I thought. And so my dream job was to be a pediatric oncologist. And
wow.
so I went to school and was studying pre-med, and I had this really unique experience where I was working at GNC, the famous supplement
Yeah, yeah.
store. And luckily at the time, like I ran into my boss there, and my boss was a clinical herbalist. And so she
Mm,
was teaching me about like all of these interesting ways to heal the body naturally, like from earth grown ingredients that I had no idea about because I'd never been taught that before. I wasn't learning that in school. And I kind of like had this big awakening of like, why am I
yep,
not learning this in school?
yeah.
And this is like ancient wisdom that has just almost been buried and we're not learning about it. And so then like I just really started dabbling in that world, because what happens obviously when you poison yourself with 4 years of chemotherapy is you're going to have like chronic health conditions.
Right.
And I was diagnosed with, quote unquote, chronic health conditions in my early 20s when I was already in college. I had IBS, I had gut issues, had chronic fatigue, all these things, but I wasn't really eating properly.
Mm.
I was up all the time studying. I was out partying. I joined a fraternity and was just kind of like, you know, letting my health slip a little bit, even though I like subconsciously always knew how important my health was. And I always was really active and like tried my best to take care of my health. I was just kind of doing the wrong things, where I was like counting the macros and just like in that world a little bit, but not necessarily focusing on like micronutrients and nutrient density. And then
Yeah.
here I was having this experience with my boss where she was bringing in like all of these tinctures, because I would get sick all the time.
Mm.
Like I always got like strep throat and my immune system was so weak. And she would just like bring me all these different random tinctures and things to boost my immune system and taught me about supplements. And then all of a sudden, like I found myself feeling way better. And so I really leaned into that. But then after college, like I went into to work in Western medicine. I went in as a medical device rep, and I worked for almost 7 years in the operating room and really got to learn the ins and outs of Western medicine and all the shortcomings in it, and see it firsthand, and see really how everything we were doing wasn't actually healing people. And that's when I
Yeah.
kind of like really didn't want to be a part of it anymore, and was able to make the switch. And that was so much of my inspiration with starting what I'm doing now.
Wow. It's so powerful, man. It sounds like, hearing you recount it, that whether it's like subconsciously still working through stuff, you needed to go back into the arena, like that saved you to realize that ultimately you can save yourself. You have these pivotal moments along the way. And I guess one of the original red pills is this idea that you can heal yourself. Like most people might hear that and it just kind of is like water off a duck's back. It doesn't really land until it does. Maybe the right person, the right time, or you get sick, or you have this kind of epiphany, this awakening that, oh yeah, like I really can heal myself. It's not just about, oh, let's just cross my fingers and hope I don't get sick. And if I do get sick, well, hopefully the white coats can save me. That it's more proactive and preventative, that like the food we eat matters, the way we live matters. Even doing a lot of the quote unquote healthy things like being into fitness, getting jacked, can sometimes not necessarily mean health all the time. So it's really cool because everybody's got a story, everybody's unique. We've all got our trials and tribulations, but when somebody can alchemize a story in such a way that like really gives a cool driving force behind what they do, and being able to kind of go back into that world to realize like, oh, this isn't the solution, something
Mm-hmm.
else is, and step back out and then birth something from that place. It's just especially more powerful and potent. So that was the idea, if you will. That was the conception of Kono Nutrition. In that moment, you knew you needed to do something in this space.
Definitely. Like you just said, it was really like such a perfect storm in my life, where every single step led me to the right moment, from the time where I like, got the job at GNC, became really fascinated with supplements and how they work and how the human body works. And then, you know, going into Western medicine after that, being in the operating room. And what I was doing then is like, I started out my career there as a spine surgery rep. And it was really just full of like every single patient that was on the table was obese, and
Mm,
we weren't actually fixing them. We were putting screws and rods into their back and just stabilizing a segment and removing the disc. But like their discs were collapsing because they're putting so much pressure on their spine,
yeah,
that then we would just do a surgery instead of, like, the reality was most of them, like if they would lose some weight and get some nutrition right, they wouldn't actually need the surgery. And then what
yeah,
was like another light bulb moment for me was, once we would do the surgery, we would give them another disease. So in spine surgery, there's this actual disease that's called adjacent segment disease. And it's by us doing the surgery on them, because your spine is meant to like move and
yeah.
bend. And we would lock down that a segment. So we would lock down like, L3, L4 in the lumbar spine. And then all of a sudden the segments above and below those would break down, because that segment is
Wow.
now locked, and it doesn't, work in the biomechanical way that it's supposed to anymore. It can't bend, it can't move. And so the pressure of the discs above and below, where we just locked it down, will now develop disease. And we called it adjacent segment disease. And it was like we were doing this to patients, where there's some crazy statistics that, like, if you get a spine surgery, if you get a fusion, I mean, you have over a 50% chance of coming back to get another one within a few years. And so I was just
Wow.
like, wow, we're just like sending people in this recurring cycle. And, I learned a lot, unfortunately, as like a business owner, because the best business in the world is American healthcare, because it's like,
Right.
how do you get the best, most successful business? You keep people coming back. It's recurring revenue,
Yeah.
right? So like keeping people on a subscription. And I saw that firsthand where like the average person now sees 13 different doctors. So they spread it really, really wide because, when you go to medical school, you have over 100 different subspecialties to choose from. And so they're just getting bounced around in the system from doctor to doctor to doctor. And none of the doctors are actually communicating with each other because they're
Yeah.
only treating the body part that they know how to treat, and then they keep coming back and back and back again. So it's essentially they're seeing, or like, a bunch of different products on recurring subscription. And that's
Wow.
how the government built the business and the healthcare system built the business. And it's the most successful business that we have in our nation. It's our number one GDP. It produces us the most money. And I was just like, wow, I don't know if I can be a part of this anymore. And I was listening to this podcast, and it was actually during COVID. And this podcast said that if you want to find your purpose in life, it's a crossroad of these four things. And it's number one, what are you good at? Number two, what do you love to do? Number three, what does the world need? And number four, how can you make some money from it? And I just like everything that it was talking about. Like, what am I good at? I was like, oh, health, nutrition, food,
Mm.
supplements. Like, I always loved it, ever since college. Like, that became my passion. And I always did that on the side, like I always was teaching people about that, and I loved it. And, everything came back to that. And so then I had this light bulb moment really during COVID, because it allowed me to take a step back from my job, because all of the surgeries that I was doing were considered elective. So I kind of didn't have a job anymore. And then I
Right.
just like, it gave me the time to just like dive into formulating my own supplements, which is something I always wanted to do. And man, that was the biggest blessing and the biggest turning point. Like you said, like everything that my life, had gone through, everything I'd gone through in my life really led me to that moment. And then I
Mm.
just listened to that one little thing of like, what am I good at? What am I love to do? And what does the world need? And I just like haven't looked back since.
Yeah, that's powerful, man. And in retrospect, it gives extra meaning to why you had to go through that, right? I think I've spoken to a lot of really cool people on the podcast that have their own stories and histories and even clients and stuff. And what's really interesting about going through a really difficult thing is I'm sure at many points in your life you were kind of like, why me? Like, this doesn't feel fair. Like, why am I putting through this? Why I'm looking at all these other kids playing, and here I am 11 years old still with cancer in a battle that's been going on for 7 or 8 years. But now, like, when you come far enough out and come full circle, you're like, oh, that's exactly why, that he didn't choose this, probably wouldn't choose it again, but you can make meaning out of something if you have the right set of circumstances and the awareness to do something with it. And how has it been? Like, what did you have to go through, in particular through like your adolescence, to unlearn some of those stories? Like, and you mentioned like going through 4 years of intense chemo, like, and you mentioned it with the spinal surgeries too. Like, the cure can become the disease, or at least
Mhm.
to some point, right? Like, chemo saved your life, the treatment saved your life, and left you in the wake of that with probably a destroyed gut microbiome, a lowered immune system function. And you said your first memory was being helpless, being carried by a stranger. Like, you've obviously done a lot of inner work too. What were some of the pivotal things that you had to like overcome and unlearn in order to put yourself even in a position where you could start to claim some kind of agency over that story?
Yeah, I like have the chills right now just thinking about everything that I have gone through to get rid of those fears, because it was, just like impregnated in my mind from like the first moment, and I never realized this until probably like, a few years ago, where I really did a deep dive on this journey and more on a spiritual journey, which I think like everyone in the health space ultimately ends up there, because
Yeah.
we might start like with food and nutrition and realize how much that makes us feel better, and then we kind of realize that everything is poison, and then that opens up the door for like conspiracy and learning all about how
Yeah.
the government has screwed us and all this, and then you end up like everyone ends up at the same spot, which is like, wow, I have the power to heal myself. And
Yeah.
it was me all along. And that's really where I've ended up the past few years in doing so much work. And just like one of the beautiful experiences that I had was actually in a breathwork ceremony.
Yeah.
And, I came face to face with that like sick little boy with leukemia, and I just like did that work. And realize that like fear has driven every decision in my entire life. And there can be, no love if fear is present. And
Yeah.
so I really had to like work on removing all of that fear from my body. And in the breathwork experience that I had, it was crazy powerful because what was happening is like every time I was breathing in, I wasn't even conscious of it. But what happens when you're getting chemotherapy is there's kind of this like smell to it, and you get
Mm,
this kind of like drip in the back of your throat from it because you're getting it through an IV, and you sit there and you throw up for like 10 hours. I mean, it's like the worst experience. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. And like I would just be a little kid playing video games in a room at the hospital and getting my chemo drips, and I would just like, take a break from playing video games and throw up and then do it all over again.
wow.
And did that for many, many years. And what was happening in this breath work is like every time I was breathing in, I started tasting this like thing in the back of my
Mm,
throat, and it's almost like that taste like when you're starting to feel sick. I was kind of just like getting that. And then all of a sudden I started feeling really nauseous. And so I start having this like somatic experience that's taking me right back to that moment of like being that scared little boy again and full of fear. And then I just started like exhaling. And then every time I would exhale, I could feel the fear and the sickness like energetically just like leaving my body. And I'm not kidding, just ever since that moment, even I became so consciously aware of like what fear has done for me in my life,
yeah.
and that I don't need to hold on to it anymore. And it
Yeah.
was really just like a somatic experience of it leaving my body, because every time I was breathing out, I could feel it just like leaving my body and leaving my body and leaving my body. And after that experience, I felt like 10 pounds lighter. And for anyone
Yep.
that's ever had an experience like that, that like you hold that fear in your chest, right? You always have that underlying chronic anxiety. And I just always had that because I realized I was always afraid to die. And for me, that's why I was always afraid of like getting sick. I had a worn down immune system.
Mm,
Every time I would get sick, I would kind of get this like panic. And for anyone that's ever gone through health struggles, which is probably a lot of the audience, because everyone in the holistic health community, like that's why we're here, is because we had to learn how to heal ourselves.
bingo.
And so I think this will resonate for a lot of people where every time you get sick, you're kind of like, oh shit, not again. Like, I don't want to go through this again. Even that like little tickle in your throat or anything. And we forget how capable our bodies are of healing. And we let the fear kind of take control, and we start going down the rabbit hole of like, oh my gosh, I don't want to get sick again. And so for me, it just like what I've done over the years to just get rid of the fear and fear of death and fear of illness is just like complete surrender, and knowing that my body is this perfectly created self-healing machine, right? Because if you truly believe that, then anything is possible. And then the big turning point moment for me in that life was that just like my symptoms are my saviors, right? So my body is always constantly trying to tell me something, even cancer. Like, I don't think cancer was trying to kill me. I think it was just trying to tell me something. And so if you can adopt that mindset of like our symptoms are actually our saviors and learn to listen to the language that the body speaks, everything changes. And then you have full faith in your body's ability to heal itself.
Yeah. And holding on to that level of awareness and belief is just so much more empowering than the alternate side of the story, right? There's a heads to tails perspective to everything you're going through. And if you a victim to the disease, the illness, power follows the blame finger, right? And you're trying to alchemize something which is very, very hard to do, especially when you're going through it, especially at a young age, because you don't even have these conceptual models. But what you're also highlighting is that you can kind of restory the whole thing that you went through. You can kind of look at it as something that you needed to go through to become a valuable teacher. And like you said, when you were doing the breath work, and I've had very interesting experiences in breath work too. Like you said, it felt like, a weight was lifted. I think it actually is. I think you would resonate with this too, that like there's the whole, the incredibly best-selling book now, The Body Keeps Score. There is something that happens through events in our lives that gets stuck in the body, in the nervous system, in the fascia, and it manifests in all funky ways. It could manifest as a chronic disease. It might manifest as a reoccurring injury or a blockage of not being able to speak your truth or whatever else that it is. But once you learn to kind of re-enter into those quote unquote traumatic events, but from a safe space, because you're
Yep.
choosing it now. That's the difference with breathwork. I'm choosing to enter into this, and you've got to keep an open mind because you don't quite know what the breathwork is going to serve up, but at least you're intentionally there for healing, that it's just the right dose of re-exciting the nervous system to access those things that are stored in the body, but the awareness is online just enough to say, you're okay, you're safe, you can heal. And it is that it is that letting go that literally it shakes it off you, it gets it off you, and then you leave and you're like, wow, I feel fundamentally different. And the biggest download it sounds like you had was fundamentally this: just, I've lived everything through the lens of the fear of death. And if
Yep.
you're terrified of death, then you can't fully live, right? Because you can't fully experience also the yin and yang of life and death, the up and down, the fat and thin. Like, it's all there again. The whole polarity of the whole game is based on that. And I think a lot of people's lives are ruled by, most of the time, their unconscious relationship to death. They haven't examined it enough, so they live a bit constricted and a bit fearful, because ultimately everything is out to get me, or I'm scared to die. And that just means you don't take as many big risks, the leaps of faith that are required to become who you might be, to launch the kind of business that maybe your lower self wouldn't launch because it's too scary. And what if that fails? And that will be another death, and on it goes, you know? So just really cool, man. A very inspiring story, to, put yourself here now and just taking agency back again, and showing people, because you've gone through something that is so difficult, that whatever you're going through, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Mhm.
Keep going. What's the
Yep.
Winston Churchill quote? When you're going through hell, just keep going and stay positive and trust that there's a way out of this.
Absolutely. I mean, I can look back now and say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And you brought it up earlier, like, would you go through it again? And like, I think the answer is yeah. Like, I wouldn't change a single thing about it. And it took me a long time to realize that, I think, And the other thing is, like, I was always open to talking about it, right? Like, I never have been shy of like telling people my story or anything like that. But I don't think I ever actually realized the depth to it,
Yeah.
until I took the time to go back and revisit it and revisit all of the memories. Because
Mm,
like the memories were there, but I was kind of like keeping them a little bit buried,
of course.
And so I was talking about it, but from a very like uh, just surface level point of like, yep, I had cancer, and I would even come on podcasts and share my story and stuff, but not actually like allow myself to feel the weight of what I went through as a little boy,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I allow myself to go there and like to really feel it, then I just feel so much more free, right?
Yes.
And so yeah, that's been huge for me, is just like allowing myself to go back and revisit all the memories and revisit all the darkness and turn it into light. And now I can confidently say, it's the best thing that ever happened to me, and everything, it led me to take all the perfect steps in life to ultimately where I'm at now, which is like, I think I'm helping more people because of that. And I think I can
Yeah.
relate to people. Like, I have this unique gift and ability to relate to anyone that's ever gone through sickness, because majority of my life I spent battling for my health.
Yeah.
And what I always tell people now is like, I almost think every single person in America has to get to that point, because sadly, like, you have to fight for your health now. It's not just like our God-given birthright to just experience health and we don't ever have to think about it. Like, every
Yeah.
person
Right.
kind of has to like really get to that point where it's like, all right, shit, I'm ready to fight for this, and I'm ready to fight for myself and fight for my health. And what do I need to do that and to look into it? And so now, like, I feel like I had to go on that whole journey to like now teach people how to do that.
Yeah. So well said. There's a quote from Paul Chek that I really like a lot. It's very simple, but he just says, sooner or later, your health will become your number one priority. And that's it. You've got to decide whether you're going to choose to make that sooner by intentional choices around what you call your first pharmacy, the shopping cart, or life is going to force you to make it a priority later when it smacks you across the head with a heart attack, a cancer diagnosis, erectile dysfunction, depression, etc., etc. So, going through that, like you said, gives you a unique perspective because you've been in the battlefield, so to speak. So as you come out of that and you take on that Czechian view that if you're going to make your health a priority sooner, which the kind of person that listens to this show are actively trying to do that, a
Mm-hmm.
big part of that is thinking about food, is thinking about lifestyle, is thinking about mindset, and even the spirituality side of things. Holistic health is what this show is built on. Supplements play a role, right? Of course they do. Heart and Soil is a supplement company, but really it's like food in a pill, because once you get down to the cleanest ingredients, that's kind of where you end up, right? And you're not just,
Yep.
it's interesting also that you've got the GNC background, which is, you think supplement store, you think health, and probably 90% of the stuff on those shelves is just bunk and
Absolutely.
garbage and could be causing those very same unintended consequences. So, where did the distinction come that, okay, I want to do supplements that help people, but it has to be of the highest quality?
Yep, it came from exactly that, like working at GNC and realizing that, damn, the majority of things that I'm taking right now are actually hurting my health. So I was a senior in college at the time. I was like the supplement guy, very in the world of fitness. I had transitioned away from, my pre-med degree into exercise physiology, and really became fascinated with the biomechanics and the way that the body moves. And I was still kind of like, dabbling in these, psychosocial determinants of health and things like that. Like I was interested in it, and interested in the herbs, and interested in, Chinese medicine, but I was kind of just dipping my toes in the water. And it wasn't until, senior year, I had a bookshelf full of supplements instead of books in my room.
Mm,
I was like just obsessed with it. And I was taking all the pre-workouts, all the protein powders, and I just like wasn't feeling good. I
yeah.
was, chronically tired. My gut was always inflamed. I couldn't like regulate my emotions properly. I was like in toxic relationships always. And I just like wasn't feeling like myself. And yeah, I just kind of had this moment where I quit taking all supplements. And I was just like, I'm not sure these are actually doing anything for
Yeah.
me. And that was when I just like really went on a journey to heal. And I'm pretty sure it was like, man, this was in the 2016. And of course, like probably the first person that most people ever hear. Like I heard a podcast with like Dr. Mark Hyman talking about food
Yeah.
as medicine back in like 2015, 2016, when like not a lot of people were talking about it. And it just like clicked for me and resonated so deeply. And I was just like, I have to learn more about this. And then I just deep dove into like consuming everything I possibly could,
Yep.
Ayurvedic principles, Chinese medicine, all the different books. And I never felt better. Like
Yep.
I was like, how does everyone not know about this? And how do people not know like food influences our mind? And like, I was reading these early studies that there was like a prison in the United Kingdom where it was a violent crimes prison, and they didn't change anything about the diet there, of the prison inmates. But all they did was give them a fish oil and a multivitamin, and the violent crimes went down by like 50%. And I'm
Wow.
like, holy shit! I was having these huge awakenings time and time again of just like everything is all connected to our gut and to our nutrition. And so, you know, I still kept my love for fitness, but I just had this huge awakening of like, just because you're fit doesn't mean you're healthy.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do after that was like, wow, okay, I want to make fitness based supplements, but from a holistic health standpoint.
Yep.
Because how can we combine these two worlds, right? Of like, just because you're fit doesn't mean you're healthy. And it felt like there was like a huge divide in the health space back then of like, and there still is, right? Of like
Hmm.
people that are very much in the camp of just like count your macros, work out, exercise. It's a simple math equation of calories in and calories out. And while like, yes, that is true if you want to like, really lose weight, you can eat in a caloric deficit and do it. And we've proven that. We're like, I don't know if you remember that guy that did the Twinkie diet.
Twinkie diet. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And so everyone always loves to point to that of like,
Yeah.
see, you can get healthier just eating Twinkies. But my question is like, did he actually get healthier, or did he just
That's
lose
right.
weight? And the
Yeah.
answer is like, he just lost weight. And so I really wanted to just like combine these two worlds together of just like, how can we make fitness based supplements, but from a holistic health point of view. And so what we started with was a pre-workout, because it was
Yeah.
like, what's the worst product that most people take for them, and how can we actually make it healthy? And we just took everything to the extreme. And I found this really beautiful tea, that's really similar to yerba mate, and it's called guayusa tea. And we found these tribes in the Amazon that drink it in ceremony, and it's one of the most antioxidant rich sources of caffeine in the world. And so we sourced this tea directly from the indigenous tribes over there. Um, and then we used lion's mane mushroom to help with cognitive focus, and we used rhodiola root to kind of balance the adrenals and help it
Mm,
all. And we use amino acids and we ferment them to help with blood flow and recovery. And then like the real kicker was like, man, everyone in the fitness space was just like, they would have like a really good formula, and then they would compromise it with something, with using like natural flavors or artificial
yeah.
flavors or something, some sort of sweetener. And so like we took it to the extreme and did everything with like real organic fruit powders to
Yep.
flavor all of our
Yep.
supplements. And so that was like really how the company Kono, my brand was birthed, was that me making that in my kitchen. I just wanted to see if it was possible. And so I just started making it in my kitchen and then giving it out to friends and family. And then before I knew it, I was shipping these black baggies around the country to like random people because people kept hearing about it and wanted to try it.
That's
And then
awesome.
I was like, all right, okay, I guess I better really step into this. And I had, quite a bit of money saved up to buy a house at the time. And I was just like, all right, screw the house. I'm going to go in on this business and see what happens. And
Full
that was
send,
4 years
baby.
ago. That was March 2021.
4 years ago. Cool.
Yeah.
And the rest is unfolding history, as they say. You've got a bunch of new products now and things like that. And it's really cool because what you can do when you're really intentional about it is pretty special, and it's funny in a sense because you're simultaneously trying to reinvent the wheel whilst not reinventing the wheel. You're just basically saying like these supplements clearly have a market. I've taken the weirdest stuff when I was young and GNC in my GNC days, like NO Explode with some ephedrine and
Yes.
be like blah, and just like all in the quest to eke out a few extra reps, thinking that was what I wanted. And I'm pretty deep in the CrossFit world now, and there's a really good example of how fitness and health can become quite disconnected. When it first
Mhm.
started, it was very much birthed in the paleo sphere of eating, and that was really good, and just kind of lost its way. And now most CrossFitters think healthy food is like a Chick-fil-A grilled chicken sandwich, and they look really good, right? They're jacked and they're lean often, and fitness wise, they've got incredible performance, but there's how can we bridge that gap again and marry the two worlds instead of having them live divorce where it's just about the calories and it's a lack of focus on the nutrient side of things, the
Yep.
bioavailability side of things, the recovery side of things, the low grade inflammation that eating that way will cause, despite you looking awesome. That's great, you look awesome, congratulations, but wouldn't you want to look awesome and feel awesome? And I think like what you're doing with thinking about these formulations in a very specific way is exactly what resonates with me and what resonates with the people here. It's like, we do similar things. We find the best stuff on the planet that's hard to get and try and make it convenient for people. And with
Mhm.
organs in particular, the big ick for people is like, ew, they taste gross. So it's
Yep.
like, okay, well, here it is conveniently. And it's cool to see you making things that are in high integrity, but also taste good, by using the right kind of flavors and sweeteners, like real fruit, for example, instead of just this mysterious, like natural flavor. And you're like, well, that sounds good, right? But then you get into the hood of what that can actually mean. And you realize that not as all as it seems. So I want to pick your brain about, as you've gotten into this world, you understand the supplement industry a little bit. What are some of the darker sides of the supplement industry? What are some of the shadier things that you think is going on in the industry as a whole?
Yeah. Yeah. When I started just even trying to formulate things in my own kitchen and deep diving into it, one of the first things I learned was like I wanted to find some amino acids, right? Because we were developing the pre workout. And really, the first thing that I learned was like, wow, most of the amino acids were made from human hair, duck feathers, or pig skin. And I was looking
Mm,
into it and I was like, why is that? Why the hell are we doing that? And then you realize it's because it's rich in keratin. Like,
mm,
hair is rich in keratin protein, and then it's easy to break down into amino acids. And so everything I was learning, I was like, this whole entire industry is built around just like cutting corners to make a little bit of money, you
right.
know? And really what I started saying is like, it became like big pharma, like big fitness was just like
Yeah.
another form of it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Where it was like at the time, just these major big fitness brands that were just like using byproducts of manufacturing to make cheap supplements that weren't actually effective. And that one was a big awakening for me. The one that I would say is probably the biggest and that people are hopefully aware of is the GRAS loophole. It's the generally recognized as safe loophole that's in the
Mm,
FDA, where essentially the FDA got so overran and so busy because we had so much technology booming in the food industry at once because of the ultra processed food, takeover, that the FDA was like, we can't regulate all of these ingredients.
hmm.
And so what they did is they essentially did the worst thing you could possibly do as the Food and Drug Administration here to regulate food and drugs is they gave food and drug companies ability to regulate themselves. And they
What could go
invented
wrong?
this loophole. Yeah, they invented this loophole called generally recognized as safe,
Uh-huh.
where they basically said, okay, if you're a food company and developing a new, product, you can now just submit it to this generally recognized as safe, and it's technically not FDA approved, but it's basically FDA verified.
Gotcha.
So they can now basically say, yeah, we got approval on this product by the FDA in the GRAS, and all they have to do is put in this like small fine print that says it's generally recognized as safe, And so what, all the artificial sweeteners and artificial flavors just boomed under that category, where food scientists were creating this like crazy. And
Yeah.
basically you can tell people it's kind of FDA approved because it's generally recognized as safe. And the only thing that they had to do was submit a self-funded study showing that it was safe. And
Nice.
so again, it was never actually studied by the FDA. It was only, regulated and studied by the food developers and the food scientists themselves. And then they could say, yeah, it's safe. And they submitted it to that loophole. And so
Wow.
really now we just have a bunch of companies that are regulating themselves, and the FDA got too busy to do that. And then even the more extreme version of that is we do the same thing in medical devices.
Yeah.
And so when I was in that world, in the medical device world, a similar thing happens where you have this process that's called a 510K clearance. And basically, the example that I can give, because I was in spine surgery, is like there was a new invention that you would go in, remove the disc, you could replace this disc with an expandable cage. And so you put this cage, made of metal in the body, and then you could expand it and jack it up. And like one came to market and they had to go through all the loopholes. They had to go through the FDA. They had to go through all the studies and processes and things like that to get it approved. And then everyone else that came out with one, there's probably like 50 devices like that came out in the next 2 to 3 years that followed. They just have to say, oh, ours is pretty much the same as theirs.
Wow.
And so we're just going to submit it through the 510K clearance because it's not a new technology. It's
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
new device and a new company. And then they just get automatically approved through the 510K clearance if they did, cadaver studies and things like that, and provide like safety studies. That's all done by the company. It's never even been used in a human before, and we can go use it. So like
Yeah.
the FDA just got like way too busy because of the technology boom and ultra processed food and devices and pharma. And so they pretty much just said, screw it. We're going to give, all these companies the ability to self-regulate themselves. And that was really where it bled into supplements, was in the artificial sweeteners, artificial
Hmm.
flavors. Like we didn't have any safety data on it that wasn't just directly from the company.
Right. So generally recognized as safe basically means as long as it doesn't instantly kill you and there's like plausible like that it's not straight up poison, that it's fine, but it probably is poison at a small level. I know that word sounds. But you know what? That's really interesting hearing you say that, and kind of how they let companies essentially self-fund and decide for themselves whether they had the budget or not to be proven as generally recognized as safe. But if you kind of like follow that all the way to the top, it's kind of what they do at the top too. I mean, we've just gone through a global pandemic where a medical device was rolled out to millions of people, generally recognized as safe, and now a lot of stuff is coming out where it's like, maybe not so fast. And some of us that were like, I'm just going to wait on this because it seems like they did exactly what you just said, which is where they have this mechanism, this thing that they can bring to market and make a lot of money on it. It's not just about benevolence and protecting people. It's also got some corporate interest and potentially billions or trillions of dollars of an incentive behind it. And they designed the studies and they redacted the studies and they hid the studies and they wanted to hide the studies for another 20 years. But, emergency use authorization, because we're in a pandemic, allowed them to rush something to market. And now we're learning some of the unintended consequences of that. So it's kind of, it reminds me of this idea that like it's idiots all the way up and it's problems all the way down. And these supplement companies are just a small version of what's happening like endemically at the system, which is just obviously broken and driven by perverse incentives. And I'm not even sure what the solution is, because I don't want necessarily the FDA regulating everything that I want to buy,
Yeah.
because they can be so corrupt and steered and driven by these incentives. So it's more than about, I think from a consumer standpoint, all right, if it's the wild, wild west, and we just acknowledge that it's the wild, wild west, even in the lauded institutions, the NIH, the CDC, etc., it's the wild, wild west there too. These are fallible humans as well. That it's now just about trust and transparency, right? And you can decide if you want to trust them. But it's tricky because I'm not sure about the transparency piece. But with brands like yourself, with brands like Heart and Soil, with these brands that are better for you brands that are proud to die on that hill, they're usually willing to say like, well, here's the transparency, here's why
Yeah.
we talk about this stuff, here's why we care about this stuff. And if I can trust the CEO, the founder, if I believe in him, and it's also very nice if I have some transparency data and things like that, then that's me set. I'm a customer for life. You guys are doing it the right way, I'm going to be with you. So that's, I'm guessing, part of like why you choose to speak about what you speak about and try and be as clean and transparent as possible, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you nailed it. Where I always tell people the same thing is like, I think it's a huge blessing that the FDA does not regulate the supplement industry. And I honestly don't know how long that will last,
Yeah.
because the FDA can probably make a lot of money on supplements by regulating them at some point, right? And we're
Right.
starting to
Right.
see it in the world of peptides and things like that.
Yes.
And so for now, I think it's a huge blessing that it doesn't. But like you said, the consumer needs to be very well educated on it, because I'm sure you guys have heard this study, and maybe a lot of consumers have, but it was like, University of Missouri tested uh, tons of different supplements that were on Amazon. And it was like
Oh yeah.
over 60% of them didn't even have the ingredient in them that they were
Yeah.
saying. And the kicker to that is that Amazon requires third party testing to even be on Amazon. So
Hmm.
they require a third party certificate of analysis. So everyone's just photoshopping or forging these third party labs,
Excellent.
to go get on Amazon and sell. So people will always figure out a loophole,
Yeah.
even if like, you or I, or, Kono, Heart and Soil, whatever, like we can go in and we can publicly display all of our third party results. And like, who's to say that you can even trust that, like it
Yep.
goes
Yep.
so deep forever. And that's why I think it's so important to just like people to trust their intuition.
Mm.
Like it goes back to like, we as humans intuitively kind of know, and we can use our common sense and this other side of us that we have this gift and ability to do. And that's what makes us human. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, most of us have like lost touch with this side of ourselves. And so many of us are so reliant on science now, and we're so reliant on the data. And like, I'm trying to get people to like pull back on that. I think the science is important, and like, it's always going to be there, and it's always going to be an important part of our society to like study whether or not things are safe and all this stuff. But I think the most important thing we can do as humans right now is to actually go internal and tap into this beautiful part of ourself that we have called our intuition, our soul,
Mm.
whatever you want to call it. And just like trust, just close your eyes and like, does this actually feel good? Does this feel right? Can I trust this? And is this good for me to consume? And, the best example I can give of that is like, there's so much data out there that like, we could argue that a potato could kill you because of all the, compounds in it. And we could also argue that a potato is one of the most powerful prebiotic fibers on the planet. It breeds good gut bacteria, all this
Right.
stuff. And it's like, go inward. What do you know about it? What do you know to be true?
Right.
And because the science can point both ways constantly.
All the
The
time,
seed the
man.
seed
Yeah.
oil the seed oil debate is the best example of all time,
Perfect
right?
example of
We
that.
have so much data in both directions. And it's like, just trust yourself, trust your body, learn how to trust your body again. And in order to do that, I think you have to like be willing to eliminate all processed foods, all the flavors, everything like that, in order to be able to even know how to eat
Yeah.
intuitively, or to have some sort of intuition to trust your body. And this is something that I love to talk about that like I don't hear many people speak about, which is we have this process in the body that's called the post-ingestive feedback loop. And it's basically a fancy term to describe how your gut and your brain are communicating with every
Hmm.
piece of
Hmm.
food that you put into your mouth. And the post-ingestive feedback loop is all built around flavors, because humans are supposed to be able to intuitively eat based on the fact that flavors equal nutrients.
Right.
And so the best example that I can give is like when the sailors came over on the Mayflower and they all got scurvy, they were craving vitamin C, right? Because they knew that they needed vitamin C to beat scurvy. So they started craving like citrus fruits
Yep.
and lemons and oranges and grapefruit and all this stuff to get vitamin C. Or the same way, when you have a homegrown tomato, it's like the juiciest, most flavorful, ripe thing you've ever tasted.
Oh,
And
dude.
then you go eat a store bought tomato and you're like, it's like water.
Two
It's
different
because it
foods,
doesn't
right?
have any, yeah, it's because it doesn't have any nutrients. So like flavors are associated with nutrients.
Mm.
And the fact that we have now like all of these flavors, there's a really good book that's called The Dorito Effect. And
Oh
it
yeah.
basically
So
describes
good.
how our whole food system got screwed because the Dorito was the first thing that came out with a flavor that wasn't actually associated with a nutrient. So they made like a taco flavored tortilla chip, right? Like a meat flavored
Yeah.
chip.
Yeah.
And then we just got hosed from there, because what happens is you're now getting this huge hit of dopamine, but you're not actually getting the nutrients associated with the
Yeah.
flavors. And that's where supplements are like so bad, and where the fitness industry totally hijacked this is like we have all these supplements and protein powders that are like, oh yeah, it's a chocolate flavored protein powder, or vanilla flavored
Mhm.
protein powder,
Mhm.
but there's not actually chocolate and vanilla in it.
No,
Like, is that real cacao?
no.
No. And so it's like you're not getting any nutrients, and you're just throwing off this dopamine loop and this post ingestive feedback loop system, to where you're not even giving your body's ability to, have a chance to learn how to eat intuitively,
Yeah.
because you're now stuck in the loophole of craving flavors instead of craving nutrients based on the flavors.
Dude, that's so good. It makes me think of so many things. Like one of the very common things you'll see when people kind of, and I'm glad you said this, like if you're going to learn to kind of in-source more of your own authority and trust and intuition, then you first got to like strip it all back. You've got to kind of like reset to zero, because again, telling somebody that's on the standard Western diet, just like listen to yourself and trust your intuition, they're like, my intuition is telling me to eat this whole pint of Ben and Jerry's, because they are so
Right.
confused, right? And the body is craving this crap, for want of a better term. But what it's really probably craving is some kind of usable nutrition, and that's just masquerading as the 90% of food like substances in the supermarket that's not even like real food. Okay, it provides some energy and sustenance, but from a nutrient standpoint, it's that classic paradigm we've currently got of overfed but undernourished. Like we are growing and expanding our waistlines, but internally we're starving. And I think when people go to something like, insert whatever term you want, but let's just call it like a real food diet, a paleo diet, an animal-based diet, whatever, and they're nutrifying themselves, it's funny to see how people start saying things like, oh, my cravings just kind of went away. And it's because your body's not keeping you in that forager mindset of like, go out and look for more. Go out and look for more. Like, why are some people able to eat 5, 6, 7,000 calories of junk per day, when obviously that doesn't make any sense, because they've got more than enough energy? They're spilling out from an energy storage standpoint over the clothes. Body fat is stored energy.
Mhm.
This is not an energy availability problem. It's a nutrient problem that people's bodies and signals are saying, hey, go get more of that, because they're getting all this flavor. And the body's kind of left like, bro, what the fuck? I just got honey dicked. I got all of this flavor, none of the nutrition. Like, what?
Yep.
What? Keep going, keep going, keep going. And then we end up with this. Or you can, feed somebody some bone broth and some boiled eggs and an ounce of liver and, a cup of milk, and they're set for hours. They don't want anything else because they've just got such a big bolus of nutrition. So that's a really good point, man, about just that post ingestive feedback loop thing is really interesting. And it's funny, again, in this riff between the science-based community and then us crazy holistic crunchy folks, where they're always like, oh,
Yep.
those idiots just appeal to nature fallacy, but blah blah blah, it's just a bit of this, it's not going to kill you. It's like, I mean, it's not going to kill you immediately, right? But it's just from first principles basics, like you say, if you trust your own intuition, does that make sense through the lens of evolution, or just make sense, common sense? You said we need less science and more common sense, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because this obsession we've got with science is just a very strange one, when science at best is a good amalgamation of pointing to things, but it can't really prove much at all. Like science can't even prove love. Like the one thing that
Mhm.
everybody can agree on is like, do you believe in love? Almost everybody's going to say, yeah. Well, can science prove love? No, not really. What science can say is, well, when two people are connected, there is this thing happening in the brain and it increases oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine. And this is the amalgamation of what we call love. And it's like, yeah, but you can't even prove that it's a literal thing. So why are we giving so much power to this thing? Just like, do you believe in love? Yes. Is that enough proof for you? Well, yeah, because I've felt it. Well, feeling is
Mhm.
believing, and health will only be found not through what the scientists say, who say like, well, Diet Cokes are fine because you need to drink 47 cans of Diet Coke to get the aspartame that's a lethal dose. But it's just like, okay, great. The science said that. The science has said a lot of things are safe. The science has said that camels were the best cigarettes to smoke. The science has said a lot of
Yep.
shit. So forget it for a minute and just, again, insource a lot of that. Where's your common sense? And if you don't know, then you've got to strip something back to find it. So sorry, I was on a rant there because you awoken something in me.
No, dude, that's beautiful. Yeah, because I think what's happening too is social media is just creating more chaos, because
Oh
we
yeah,
almost now have, instead of like the fitness versus health community, now it's like the holistic versus the evidence-based
yeah,
community.
yeah.
And what I see on both sides is people are now just like creating more chaos and more mass confusion, because everyone's just like tagging each other and trying to
Yeah.
prove each other wrong, and they're like, okay, well, he says like, everyone in the evidence-based community like hates Paul Saladino. They
Yeah, they
tag
do.
every single
They hate
video
my
that
man Paul.
right, exactly. They tag every single video that he does, and they basically try to prove everything he's saying wrong. And it's like, but then there's also people in the holistic bucket that are doing the same thing with the evidence-based community. And it's like, dude, I've never met anyone that's ever changed the world from trying to bring someone else down.
No.
And all we're doing is just like internet bullying, trying to prove our point. And no one's proving a point when you're just like attacking someone else. You're not proving your point at all. You're just like creating more negativity in the space. And truthfully, it's like, I bet every single person that got on social media started with really great intentions.
Right.
Like, I want to help people. And then they just like don't realize that we're all stuck in this loop of just like trying to be right. And so everyone's just like trying to be right by proving other people wrong. But you can only be
Yeah.
right by knowing and feeling what is actually truth. And that's
Yeah,
why
dude.
we just need to like drown out the rest of the chaos that is just created and just like go inward and learn how to trust yourself again.
Yeah.
Because, like you said it best, it's a feeling. Like love is a feeling, and knowing is a feeling, and truth is a feeling.
It's that point that you just raised about kind of the online culture wars right now. They're like dunking on each other. It's just so indicative of where we're at culturally. Like we've become addicted to polarity, and we bond more now as people over the hatred of the outgroup than on the values of the in-group. So what's become more magnetic, and the algorithm feeds this poison to us, so it becomes what we're looking for, and these content creators get trapped in it, is just like, who can I shit on today, so that all of my little fans in the comments can go, yay, screw that guy. And then all of their angry rioters come in and say, but da. And then it just goes back and forth, and like nothing gets done. It's just like two aisles of monkeys flinging poop. And it's just like, all's going to happen in that is it just gets really, really messy. And nobody's really learning much from there. It's kind of like, to sound woo, it's a very low vibration
Exactly.
of exchange, right? And
Yep.
what's the point of it? I guess like they often like, so the science-based community would ride on the moral high ground of saying like, but we have to dispel misinformation. Okay, that's cool, I guess. But then like your whole page has gone from helping people to dunking on what you deem the crazy people. But at the same time, the same people you're dunking on and calling crazy and giving misinformation are also helping millions of people in their own way who are healing through methods that you said don't exist. So like, what are we doing?
Yep. Dude, it's just like, every war exists for this reason too, of we're just like all arguing who is right, whether it's
Yeah,
religion, whether it's God, whether it's anything like that. And it's just like we're seeing it on social media too, or it's just like another war of like I'm right and you're wrong. But that's just not how things work. And so yeah, I just like, man, I just like really pray that everyone can go back to the reason why like we all got on, into this in the first place, which is to help people. And
yeah,
just because they're helping people in a different way than you would help people doesn't mean that they're not helping people. Cause like
yeah.
majority of people would agree of like the basics of like, all right, let's get people off these ultra processed foods.
That's
Let's
right.
get
Yeah,
people eating more real food. Let's get people moving their body a little bit more, and like, I just think people have lost so much empathy. And that's really what it comes down to is like, I always just tell people like look around, right? Like the people that you know and love. Like we have statistics that show that now 1 in 3 people will get cancer in their lifetime.
yeah,
You know, over 70% of people are overweight or obese. 60% of people have heart disease. 60% of people have 2 or more chronic diseases. Like chances are people that you love and care about more than anything in the world are battling for their life and health right now, because that's just the reality that we live in. And it's like we get so consumed in the mind of just like trying to be right or trying to prove a point that we forget that like we're all in it together to just help people,
yeah, dude.
and that's like really what it comes down to. And so I just, you know, that's my goal, is to like I said at the beginning, like I feel like I can just like so deeply relate to people. So my goal is just to like really, really help people get back to here,
Yeah.
like get back to like living from a place of our hearts and doing things from the right energy and from the right intention.
Yeah, yeah. And if we keep further dividing ourselves, which divides one another, and that happens at the highest levels of government or the culture wars or the science versus the woos or whatever it is, then we're clearly, the odds seem like they are stacked against us in the element that we will thrive in this lifetime unless we unite, unless we come together. You know, the whole, it's the same, left and right wing is of the same bird, and it
Yeah.
feels like it's flying into the edge of a cliff right now, whilst people just, fling the poop again, and it's not going to be fixed that way. So I think those are really well articulated points, and ultimately, like you said, you just have to try and cut out a lot of that noise. It's hard to hate up close, is something somebody said to me a long time ago, that it's easy to be like, it's them, they're the bad people, they're not on my team, through a screen, because there's no consequences to that. But obviously there is. The consequences are that you live in a negative energy. There's that whole, like, holding anger for another person is like sipping on a poison and expecting them to be hurt by it's just poisoning you. So, like, manage your own consciousness in that way, manage your own energetic hygiene, ask yourself where you're partaking in these conversations, and whether you're actually being of service or whether you're actually just further dividing. And then stay in your own lane, admit that you don't really know much about anything, and we're all just kind of faking it and making it. And if we can hopefully feel something true along the way, then we hold on to it and we pull on that thread, and we hope that we can help other people find that in the process for themselves, and I think that's a much healthier way of going at it than just shouting at each other and hating one another, because it's not going to work.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yep. And like I talked about, like it's like really everyone has the same end goal too.
Yeah.
And like how do we not realize that? You know what I mean? Like that's the craziest part for me.
Yeah.
Um is that everyone has the same end goal. But
Yeah.
we'll
Speaking
leave it at that.
about health, this is an interesting one, and I've been on a similar journey to, I think, the journey that you've been on here, which is, you said in a post, one of the worst things I did for my health was to obsess about my health. Talk to me about that. Talk to me about the unhealthy obsession with health.
Yeah, I think it happens to most people when we find out the truth. Um we get so into our health because we just found out that like, oh my gosh, everything I've ever known wasn't probably true.
Yeah.
Our food supply is poisoned. Artificial light is hurting my circadian rhythm. And you just go into like this, obsessive nature where everything has to be dialed. We have to live in this perfect routine. And then basically you're just screaming, I don't trust my body. And I just
Mm.
got to that point where like I would quit going out with friends to stay in and get my perfect 8 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
And I did that for like years to the point where I just like self isolated in this bubble because I wanted to protect my health. And again,
Yeah.
it went back to like my fear of death, my fear of illness, my fear of sickness, where like my body's going to be okay. And in fact, by me staying up late and being spontaneous and, maybe having a drink with my friends and going out and having fun is actually the best thing I can do for my health right now. And I
Right.
think that it's just like such a Western thought that we have. And like I talked about, like it's really a huge bummer because we're almost forced into it. Like we're forced to really fight for our health and forced to think about it way more than any other country.
Yeah. Right.
So it's easy to get consumed by it. And so it's just like there's such a dance, like this beautiful dance where it's like, yes, I have to try really hard. I do have to put in some effort to be healthy, but also at the same time, I need to allow myself to live my life and
Yeah.
to
Agreed.
have fun and know that like I'm bigger than this.
Yeah.
And I just had to learn the hard way. Unfortunately, like kind of sabotaged some relationships because of it or friendships and, got really obsessive with it because I felt so good, you
Yeah.
know? And so
Yeah.
like you feel so good, you want to go all the way into it. And I think it was just an important journey for me and an important journey for a lot of people to go on is you usually swing too far in one direction
That's right.
and
Yeah.
then maybe swing back into the balance.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was just another part of life's journey. But I do see like I made that because I see so many people doing it again. Like
Do it.
I'm just like hoping that other people can like learn from the mistakes if we talk about it a little bit
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's like, man, that was like a big regret for me, or just a big lesson.
Yeah.
Um, was that I swung so hard in that direction that I just like wasn't actually allowing myself to live. I mean, you said it best earlier. It's like if you're afraid to die, you're kind of afraid to live.
Right. Right.
There can be no birth without death and no light without dark. And like, I just realized like everything is duality.
Yeah.
And I just needed to allow myself to live a little bit more in order to actually be healthier, which is crazy.
Crazy idea, man. Wild idea. That might have been me talking in a mirror. Like the things that you just recounted are exactly the journey that I've been on, and it's why I love it when this topic comes up. And it's not just me hammering that, that other people can share in it too, because I think unless we really think about this, we do end up there by accident, and hopefully we don't stay there too long and actually become orthorexic, where our unhealthy obsession with health starts to damage us in the quest of being like, praying at the altar of Andrew Huberman's morning optimized routines, like this productivity purgatory that everything we do has to be optimized to death. And in the process, we end up, dying to something that's supposed to be
Mhm.
giving us life. And, maybe it's a bit of aging or wisdom or whatever it is. It's just like, again, there is a lot of shit that's out to get us. It's a big, scary, poisoned world. All of those things can coexist. And I'm still convinced that one of the biggest health hacks, for want of a better term, is to relax a little bit. It's just
Yeah.
to like, be in a grounded nervous system. Try not to take it all so seriously, even though it is serious business. I say this to people all the time because it sticks and it's a bit crude, but relax your butthole. Like, everybody's walking around all puckered up and so tense. Like at any moment they're gonna fucking pop, and it's just like, relax, man. You'll remember that one, like, what do I need to do right now? What I need to do is relax my butthole and just like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, it's gonna be okay. It's a crazy world. Nothing is made better or easier by more anxiety, by more stress, by more shaking your angry fist at the
Mhm.
system. We want to change. We wouldn't be having this conversation if we didn't want to impact change and empower people, but not to the point where it pushes them over the edge into an unhealthy fear narrative or an over control narrative, which is, like you said, ultimately rooted in the fear of death, which is something we all have to reconcile, that nobody's getting out alive. And maybe if we're not getting out alive, maybe we should try and have some fun in the process, which doesn't mean complete debauchery and chaos and eat
No.
McDonald's every single day, but it means something more like balance. And it's hard to be balanced in a desperately unbalanced world, but it is possible. And I think that you're a really good example of that. And I think that I'm a working progress of trying to be an example of that for other people, where I take this stuff seriously and have a bit of fun in the process too. And it's okay. Those things can coexist.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I was getting at earlier, that like everyone I see in the health space has to go on this journey, but we all end up in the same space. And like the end of the health journey
Yeah.
is that like nothing ever mattered more than me, like me figuring out how to heal myself, than me figuring out, how to regulate my emotions and how to regulate my nervous system and stuff like that. And it's like everyone I see on the health journey ultimately ends up in this like spiritual space,
Yeah.
because that's what you realize is like the most important aspect of health is this like, emotional aspect to health, and diving into things like the body keeps score and how our
Mm,
emotions affect everything. And even like, to break it down in the most simple terms ever, the word disease literally just means dis-ease, like a feeling of uneasiness,
that's right.
right? So like everything that matters the most is how we feel. Like I think that's ultimately what people want in their health journey, is to feel better,
It is.
but
Yeah.
then they're only focusing on like one segment of it, like the physical aspect of like, I'm going to eat food to feel better. But like, what else can I do to feel better? And what feeling am I looking for? And how can I feel more of it? And I think at the end of the day, like majority of people just want to feel more at peace.
Yeah.
We want to feel a little bit happier. We want to feel like we can allow ourselves to kind of just like live and flow and not be so uptight. And,
Yeah.
I think that that comes only when you've gone through all the other steps, though, because I think every step is really important, of like awakening to the food system and awakening to all the rules in society that have been placed on us that, were there to protect us,
Yeah.
but did quite the opposite, and that we've all lived in fear from it. And
That
we live in separation, like we live in separation because of the state that you live in and the country that you live in and the religion that you identify with and all of this stuff. And it's just like the world is set up for separation. And the ultimate answer that I see, like people that are really, really far along in their health journey, that we all come back to is just like, we want to feel a sense of peace and oneness,
yes.
And so I think that like, that's where I get a little bit bummed with the whole like Maha situation, is like, I would love for everyone, of course, to get behind like what they're trying to do with that and like make America healthier. Like I think that that is an amazing thing that we're doing. But I think that there's the reason why so many people are hating on that movement is because it's like like you talked about earlier, like the frequency of it. Is it really a place of like love? Like, are we doing it from a place of love? And I think that the reason why we're not there yet is because we've been so upset and angry at our food system for so long and how it's
Mm,
failed us that like now all of our colleagues are so fired up about it that like there's still that sense of like anger,
yes.
like holy shit, we got to fix this, we got to do this, we got to remove all this and
Yeah.
all this. And people look at it of just like these are kind of just like crazy people
Yeah.
because the energy of how they're relaying the message is still like a lot of anger in there.
Mm,
And like anger never resonates with anyone. Like it can get some shit done for a little bit, but it's never actually how you win. And
yeah,
so
dude.
like if you truly want everyone to be healthy, like it needs to be from this different energy. And so I think that people can't even like subconsciously recognize that. Like they just look at it like we talked about, like they're just kind of crazy and it's really out there. But if it was from a different energy and like an educational energy and a calm and peaceful presence, and we can like just speak about it from that state, I think it would resonate with everyone way differently.
Yeah. Why? Because why wouldn't it, right? Why would anybody fundamentally disagree with making America and humans healthier? Like, that's a very noble thing that we should all want. But you're right, the energy with which it's being conveyed and received is not landing, and I'm glad you mentioned that, anger is an interesting one. It's often associated with the element of fire for obvious reasons because it's hot and it like burns, and it can be channeled because on one hand you're like, if you lash out in anger, it's never a good situation. But if you feel angry about something, it can be a signal that your boundaries are being overstepped. And I think what's required of people there is something, again, like an inner alchemy of turning that anger that you want to lash out and oppress the others and show how they were wrong into something like a sacred rage that you can channel to use that fire to like burn away the untruths and communicate with it with as much love and as passion as you possibly can, but not this angry like F you energy. You're the bad guys, you're wrong. It's
And
like,
like I told you so. We've been
yeah,
talking about this for so long. Like
yes,
we knew about it for so long that like, other countries didn't have to deal with this and like we're getting poisoned from glyphosate and like, they make food differently in other countries and like all of that stuff is true.
yeah.
Like it is very true. But it's like all about the delivery of the message to not make us sound fucking crazy,
One
you
hundred
know?
percent. And unfortunately, like in the echo chambers and spheres, the voices that usually rise to the top are the ones that sound crazy because that's what the algorithm wants to feed to people because it's reactionary. So again, this is why ultimately I fundamentally believe too that it's interesting that there is at least some noise at the top now, that maybe it can be met from a bottom up, top down system somewhere in the middle. But still, for the most part, this is always going to be the people coming together. It's a groundswell, it's a bottom up movement because the top is too corrupt unless the system is completely broken down some way and can rebuild. It's generationally cursed now to just keep being this same beast with a different mask. And that's why we need to have conversations like this. Like, as much as this isn't on the world global platform, the several thousand people that listen to this episode hopefully have something to leave with and think about, and it changes the way in which they either speak about these things or the choices that they're going to make with how they buy supplements now, etc. And that is the infinite ripple, because if that person changes the way they speak to another person, then that changes the way that person goes home and even loves their partner. And it's very hard to conceptualize what that means, other than you try and leave people better than you found them. You try and leave the world better than you found them. You try to leave places better than you found them, whether it's picking up trash. You try and leave product space better than you found it by making better for you products and thinking consciously about these things. And if enough people do that, there's got to be a critical tipping point, right? There has to be at some point. So we just have to stay hopeful and optimistic in the process and just keep going, and trust that, like, we're going to figure this out. I think we're going to figure this out. Might be messy and fiery and angry along the way, but let's try to do the best that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it best, and it really all comes from a place of light, like one light shines brighter and then, it signals off a light in someone else, and then all of a sudden there's light everywhere.
Yeah.
And, darkness is just the absence of light. Like darkness isn't something that you can actually see and feel and stuff
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. it's just the absence of light. And so the ultimate way to get through to everyone is just to like shine your light and be a place of light. And so that's like why I'm preaching this message is like, that's all we have to do is deliver it in a way with light instead of darkness.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, it's a process that takes some time. And unfortunately, neither of us can sell you a supplement that will get you there, but we can provide tools along the way that help your physical flourishing so that you can go on a journey like this. And part of that is feeding yourself clean food, giving yourself the right supplements, giving yourself clean water, giving yourself the right kind of routines and practices that allow you to stay grounded. So I appreciate you, man. I appreciate the conversation and what you're creating. Where can people go to keep up with you and the company, check out the products and anything else that's on your mind before we close today?
Yeah, absolutely. My personal Instagram is Alex D. Conley. It's Conley. The company is at Kono Nutrition, and it's kononutrition.com. And yeah, I guess what I'll leave people with is just that the biggest thing that we're trying to do, and really like the mission behind it, is, if I could sum it up in one sentence, it's what we tell people all the time, is that like when someone asks me what I do, it's that we help people heal by putting health first. And going back to the quote of, a healthy person has 1,000 wishes, but a sick person has only one. I think it's the most important thing you can do in your life is to put your health first. And then, beyond that, what does it mean to put your health first? I've kind of answered that question for myself. And for me, it looks like having a mind that's in focus, a body that's in motion, and a soul that's in peace. And I think that last aspect is the most important part that like we're all chasing, but we don't know how to achieve it and don't know how to get there. But it's just like this feeling that we're looking for. And I think that the way that we do that through nutrition at Kono is, the sourcing is what matters more than anything, because people don't realize that like the food that you eat is not only energy for your body, but it's also an energy that it carries itself. And we know this because like there's this whole classification of compounds called adaptogens, where it's like, hey, how they were grown matters, because an adaptogen grows in like this really harsh environment, and then it causes the plant to adapt and overcome to its environment and its stressful life that it had. And then when we consume it, holy shit, it helps us adapt to our stress. And it's the same thing why like the kosher certification exists, is because like this animal was killed in a way that it didn't spike that animal's cortisol right before death. And then we consume that and we take on the energy, and like life gives life. And so really like the thing that we try to do most is like the sourcing matters so much. And that's why we partner with the family owned farms and the regenerative agriculture. And because it's the energy of the food that we're consuming that really matters. And that's what changed everything for me. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is just like, be so intentional about the sourcing and the energy of where it's coming from. And then the end consumer, I think, can really feel that.
Yep. Very well said. Great point to close. Yeah. I've often said that what we want to feel is at peace and in power. And I think you just summarized that beautifully as well. So intentionality in all the things you do, fam, source from the places that are doing it the right way. Yes, sometimes it's a little bit more money, but you have to ask yourself what kind of future you're investing in, what kind of systems you want to support. And you know what I always say, put your money where your mouth is, vote with your dollar. This is the kind of things that we need to support if we do want to usher in this new world where people can rise to the top, that give a shit about the future for our families, our soils, our health, our kids. And if nothing else, relax your buttholes, right? Alex, you're the man, dude.
Dude, likewise.
Let's wrap this thing up, and you lot stay radical. We will see you next week. Peace. All right, friends, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Radical Health Radio. We got a fresh new podcast for you every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, consider liking, subscribing, reviewing, and rating us on your podcast platform. It helps to spread this message of radical health. We'll see you next week.